The air hangs heavy with a peculiar dampness that seeps through the stone walls of Thornfield Manor. The year is 1895, and winter's grip refuses to loosen, even as the calendar insists spring should arrive. In the vast drawing room, where portraits of stern-faced ancestors stare down from ornate golden frames, the fireplace crackles with fresh-cut oak. The flames cast dancing shadows across the room, giving life to otherwise still objects. A porcelain shepherdess on the mantelpiece seems to sway with the rhythm of the fire. The grandfather clock in the corner ticks away, each second falling heavily into the past. Tonight, Thornfield Manor plays host to a gathering unlike any it has seen before. It is not a joyous occasion, though the invitation suggested a simple winter soiree. No, this evening serves a different purpose entirely. 3 women sit apart from each other, each in a different corner of the room, each wearing the exact same dress. The garment in question is remarkable, a deep burgundy silk creation with intricate black beadwork across the bodice, cinched tight at the waist, before cascading into a modest bustle. The sleeves puff slightly at the shoulders before narrowing down the arm, ending in delicate lace cuffs that almost hide the hands. It is the height of fashion for 1895, expensive enough to be noticed, but not so ostentatious as to seem vulgar. The first woman, seated nearest the door, is Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. At 32, she retains the fresh-faced beauty of her youth, though worry has begun to etch fine lines around her eyes. Her blonde hair is swept up in an elegant chignon, not a strand out of place. Her gloved hands rest in her lap, occasionally fidgeting with her handkerchief, the only outward sign of her discomfort. Across the room, Miss Catherine Marsh occupies a velvet-upholstered chair by the window. At 25, she possesses a quiet intensity that draws the eye. Her dark hair frames a pale face, and her green eyes move constantly, observing everything but revealing nothing. She sits perfectly still, her posture rigid, as if the slightest movement might shatter her composure. And then there is the third woman, the tallest of the 3, standing by the fireplace. Miss Victoria Winters towers over most women, and even some men, with her height accentuated by her ramrod-straight posture. Her red hair, a shade darker than the dress she wears, is styled elaborately with jeweled pins catching the firelight. At 28, she carries herself with the confidence of someone who knows her own worth. One might notice, if looking closely, that while the dress appears identical to those worn by the other women, something about the way it fits her waist seems different. These 3 women, connected by the unusual circumstance of wearing identical dresses, have been brought together by one man, Mr. James Thornfield, the current master of Thornfield Manor and sole heir to the Thornfield shipping fortune. James stands by the drinks cabinet, pouring himself a 3rd glass of brandy. At 40, his once handsome face shows the effects of a life lived too hard, too fast. Deep lines crease his forehead, and his eyes have a haunted quality that no amount of expensive liquor seems able to drown. His hands shake slightly as he replaces the crystal decanter. "I suppose you're all wondering why I've asked you here tonight," he finally says, breaking the silence that has stretched uncomfortably since the last servant closed the drawing room door. None of the women respond. Their silence speaks volumes. James takes a long swallow of his brandy before continuing. "And I imagine you're curious about the dresses." At this, Mrs. Blackwood cannot contain herself. "It's beyond improper, James, to ask us to wear the same gown, as if we were actresses in some vulgar theatrical production. What will people say?" "No one will say anything, Eleanor, because no one knows you're here," James replies coldly. "The servants have been given the evening off, and I've told everyone in the village that I'm away in London on business." Miss Marsh speaks up, her voice soft but clear. "Why the deception, Mr. Thornfield? Why bring us here under false pretenses?" James walks to the center of the room, the firelight catching the silver at his temples. "Because one of you is responsible for the death of my sister, Clara." The accusation lands in the room like a physical blow. Mrs. Blackwood gasps audibly. Miss Marsh's eyes widen, though she maintains her composure. Only Miss Winters seems unmoved, her expression unreadable, as she continues to stare into the flames. "That's preposterous," Mrs. Blackwood says, pressing a hand to her chest. "Clara died of consumption last autumn. Everyone knows that." James turns to her, his eyes hard. "Is that what everyone knows, Eleanor? Is that the story we all agreed to tell?" Miss Marsh leans forward slightly. "Mr. Thornfield, Clara was my dearest friend. If you have reason to believe her death was not natural, James interrupts with a harsh laugh. No, Catherine. There was nothing natural about it. My sister was poisoned, slowly, methodically, over the course of several months. Made to look like consumption, yes, but the physician who attended her had suspicions. He kept samples of her medicine, her food. After her death, he conducted tests. The results were conclusive. A heavy silence falls over the room. The grandfather clock chimes 9 times, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Why us? Miss Winters finally speaks, her voice deep and melodious. She turns from the fire to face James directly. Why these dresses? James walks toward her, stopping just short of what would be considered proper distance. Because, Victoria, this dress was the last thing Clara designed before she died. She was making it for her engagement announcement, an engagement that never came to pass because she was murdered before she could finish it. I still don't understand, Mrs. Blackwood says, dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. Why make us wear it? Because one of you completed it, James says, turning to address all 3 women. One of you took her design, her measurements, and finished what she started, and then, most curiously, had 2 identical copies made. Miss Marsh shakes her head slightly. That doesn't make me a murderer, Mr. Thornfield. I was Clara's friend and a fellow enthusiast of dressmaking. When I found her designs after her death, I thought completing her final creation would be a fitting tribute. A touching sentiment, James replies, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Except you weren't the only one with that idea, were you? All eyes turn to Mrs. Blackwood, who clutches her handkerchief tighter. I commissioned the dress from Clara's sketches, yes, as a remembrance. I loved her like a sister. And you, Victoria? James asks, turning back to the tallest woman. What's your explanation? Miss Winters meets his gaze unflinchingly. I have none to give. Clara showed me her designs before she fell ill. I admired them, so I had my dressmaker create something similar. Any resemblance to her original concept is purely coincidental. James laughs, the sound hollow and without humor. 3 identical dresses, all based on Clara's final design. One made from sentiment, one made from love, and one made from... What exactly, Victoria? Guilt? A trophy, perhaps? Miss Winters narrows her eyes but says nothing. Here's what I believe, James continues, pacing the room. One of you poisoned my sister. One of you stood to gain from her death. One of you is wearing that dress not as a tribute but as a mockery of her memory. This is absurd, Mrs. Blackwood protests, rising to her feet. I won't stay here and be accused of such a monstrous act. Clara was like family to me. Sit down, Eleanor, James commands, his voice sharp enough to make her comply instantly. None of you is leaving until I discover the truth. And how do you propose to do that? Miss Marsh asks, her composure beginning to crack. You've made accusations without evidence, forced us to wear these dresses as some sort of macabre costume party. What next? James walks to a small writing desk in the corner and removes a folded document. Clara kept a journal. I found it hidden beneath a floorboard in her room 3 days ago. I haven't read it all yet. The pain is still too fresh. But what I have read suggests she knew her killer, that she suspected someone was poisoning her. The women exchange glances, each assessing the others with new wariness. In her final entry, James continues, Clara wrote that she had proof, that she had discovered something that would reveal the identity of her poisoner beyond any doubt. But she died before she could tell me what it was. Miss Winters speaks again, her voice steady. And you believe this proof has something to do with her dress design? I do, James confirms. Because in her journal, Clara mentioned a secret compartment she had designed into the waistband of her dress, a place to hide the evidence she had gathered against her killer. All 3 women instinctively placed their hands at their waists, a gesture not lost on James. So you see, he says, setting down his empty glass, that's why you're all here, wearing the same dress. Because one of you is a murderer, and the proof is hidden in the waist of your gown. Outside, rain begins to fall, pattering against the windows. A flash of lightning illuminates the room momentarily, followed by the low rumble of thunder, the perfect accompaniment to the drama unfolding within Thornfield Manor. Mrs. Blackwood is the first to break the tension. This is madness, James. Absolute madness. Check my dress if you must, but I assure you you'll find nothing. I intend to check all 3 dresses, James replies coldly. But first, I want each of you to tell me about your relationship with Clara, starting with you, Eleanor. Mrs. Blackwood smooths her skirts nervously before speaking. Clara and I met at finishing school when we were girls. We remained close even after I married. She was godmother to my son, for heaven's sake. Why would I harm her? Perhaps because your husband left his entire fortune to Clara when he died last year, James suggests. A fortune that would have passed to you had Clara not been alive to receive it. Mrs. Blackwood's face pales. That's not true. Henry left provisions for me in his will. A modest allowance, James corrects her. Nothing compared to what Clara received. She told me she intended to share it with you once the estate was settled. Did she tell you that as well? Mrs. Blackwood looks away, unable to meet his gaze. I thought not, James says before turning to Miss Marsh. And you, Catherine? What was your relationship with my sister? Miss Marsh clasps her hands together tightly. As I said, Clara was my dearest friend. We shared many interests: literature, music, dressmaking. We had no secrets from each other. No secrets? James raises an eyebrow. Then you knew about her engagement? A flash of something, surprise, anger, crosses Miss Marsh's face before she composes herself. She mentioned she had received an offer, yes, from the man you yourself had set your cap at for nearly 2 years. James presses. Lord Haversham's son, Edmund. Miss Marsh's cheeks flush slightly. Edmund and I were merely acquaintances. If he chose Clara over me, I bore her no ill will for it. How very magnanimous, James remarks dryly before turning to Miss Winters. And finally Victoria, the mysterious Miss Winters who appeared in our lives just 6 months before Clara fell ill. Who are you, really? Miss Winters tilts her head slightly, studying James with an intensity that makes him shift uncomfortably. I am exactly who I claim to be, the daughter of Colonel Winters of the Bengal Lancers. I met Clara at Lady Pembroke's literary salon and we became friends. Nothing more sinister than that. Yet you were the last person to see her alive, James points out. You brought her tea the night she took a drastic turn for the worse. Tea that her maid prepared, Miss Winters counters smoothly. I merely carried the tray upstairs because the girl was busy with other tasks. The room falls silent again. The only sounds the crackling of the fire and the increasingly heavy rain outside. James walks to the window, looking out into the darkness. One of you is lying, he says without turning around. And before this night is over, I will know which one. As if on cue, the lights flicker, then go out entirely. The fire provides the only illumination now, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Mrs. Blackwood lets out a small cry of alarm. Remain calm, James says, moving toward the bell pull to summon a servant before remembering he's sent them all away. It's just the storm affecting the electrical supply. It happens frequently. How convenient, Miss Winters remarks, still standing calmly by the fire. A dark and stormy night for your melodramatic accusations. Mock all you want, Victoria, James replies. But someone in this room killed my sister, and I intend to prove it. As he moves to light the oil lamps that still remain in the room for precisely such emergencies, no one notices Miss Marsh slip something small from her reticule into her gloved hand. The scene is set. 3 women in identical dresses, a grieving, suspicious brother, a storm raging outside, isolating them from the rest of the world, and somewhere, hidden in the waist of one dress, evidence of a murder that someone is desperate to keep concealed. The night has only just begun. With the oil lamps now casting a warm, flickering glow throughout the room, James regards each woman in turn. I propose we handle this in a civilized manner. I will examine each of your dresses in private, one at a time, in the adjoining study. Ladies, you may assist each other with the unlacing if necessary, but the waistband must remain intact for my inspection. Mrs. Blackwood rises in indignation. This is beyond improper, James. You cannot seriously expect us to disrobe for your inspection. It's indecent. What I find indecent, Eleanor, is my sister's murder, James replies coldly. But if it eases your concerns, you may keep your undergarments on. I need only examine the waistband of the dress. Miss Marsh speaks up, her voice steady despite the circumstances. And if we refuse this indignity? James walks to the mantelpiece and retrieves a small revolver that had been hidden behind a decorative box. Then I shall be forced to conclude that the person refusing has something to hide. The women exchange glances, a silent communication passing between them. I have nothing to hide, Miss Winters declares, stepping forward. I will go first. James gestures toward the study door with the revolver. After you. As they exit, Mrs. Blackwood collapses back into her chair, her face ashen. This is a nightmare, she whispers. A complete nightmare. Miss Marsh moves to sit beside her, placing a comforting hand on her arm. Courage, Eleanor. If we are innocent, we have nothing to fear. Mrs. Blackwood looks at her with haunted eyes. Do we not? James is half mad with grief and brandy. Who knows what he might do, what he might convince himself of. He loved Clara dearly, Miss Marsh acknowledges, as did we all. Did we? Mrs. Blackwood asks softly, studying Miss Marsh's face. I sometimes wondered about you, Catherine. The way you looked at her when you thought no one was watching. It wasn't always friendly. Miss Marsh withdraws her hand as if burned. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Mrs. Blackwood continues, a new hardness entering her voice. I saw how you changed after Clara announced her engagement. The congratulations you offered sounded hollow, even to my ears. And what of you? Miss Marsh counters, keeping her voice low. A widow with mounting debts and a child to support. Clara's inheritance would have solved all your problems. Before Mrs. Blackwood can respond, the study door opens. Miss Winters emerges, her face impassive, followed by James, who looks frustrated. Catherine, he says, gesturing toward the study. You're next. Miss Marsh rises gracefully, smoothing her skirts. Of course, as she passes Miss Winters, their eyes meet briefly. Something unspoken passes between them, a warning perhaps, or a question. Once the study door closes, Mrs. Blackwood turns to Miss Winters. Well, what happened in there? Miss Winters takes a seat by the fire, the flames highlighting the copper in her hair. He examined the waistband of my dress. Found nothing, of course. And he was gentlemanly about it. A hint of a smile plays at Miss Winters' lips, as gentlemanly as a man can be when he's accusing you of murder while brandishing a revolver. Mrs. Blackwood twists her handkerchief nervously. This is insanity. Clara died of consumption. Everyone knows that. Did she? Miss Winters asks, studying Mrs. Blackwood intently. You visited her often during her illness, didn't you? Brought her special tonics, home remedies? Mrs. Blackwood stiffens, as any friend would. The doctors could do little for her comfort. I merely tried to ease her suffering. How very charitable, Miss Winters remarks, her tone making the compliment sound like anything but. Inside the study, James circles Miss Marsh, who stands rigidly by the desk, her arms wrapped protectively around her waist. You understand I must be thorough, he says, setting the revolver down just out of her reach. I understand you're grieving, she replies carefully. Grief can make us see connections that aren't there, James. He steps closer. Turn around, please. I need to examine the back of the waistband first. Miss Marsh complies, her shoulders tense as she feels his fingers probe the fabric of her dress. Clara and I were friends, she says quietly. True friends. I would never have harmed her. Yet you envied her, James remarks, continuing his examination. She had everything you wanted, beauty, wealth, and finally, Edmund Haversham's affection. I didn't envy her, Miss Marsh insists. I admired her. There's a difference. Is there? James asks, moving to examine the front of the waistband now. Admiration and envy often walk hand in hand, Catherine. As his fingers probe a particular section of the waistband, Miss Marsh tenses almost imperceptibly. James notices and lingers there, feeling more carefully. What's this? He murmurs, his fingers detecting something hard and thin concealed within the fabric. Miss Marsh's hand flies to his, stopping his exploration. It's just boning, she says quickly. For structure. All properly made dresses have them. James meets her gaze, suspicion clear in his eyes. Let me see. After a moment of silent resistance, Miss Marsh drops her hand. James continues his examination, but whatever he thought he felt seems to elude him now. He steps back, frustrated. You may go, he says finally. Send Eleanor in. Miss Marsh exits swiftly, her composure intact but her eyes troubled. In the drawing room, she nods to Mrs. Blackwood. Your turn. As Mrs. Blackwood rises shakily to her feet, Miss Marsh takes her place by the fire, noticeably distant from Miss Winters. The two women regard each other warily as Mrs. Blackwood disappears into the study. Inside, James has poured himself another brandy, which he sips as Mrs. Blackwood enters. This is unnecessary, James, she begins, her voice trembling slightly. I loved Clara. I would never— Save your protestations, James interrupts. Turn around, please. With reluctance, Mrs. Blackwood complies. As James examines her dress, she speaks again, her voice stronger now. Have you considered that Clara might have been mistaken? That perhaps her illness affected her mind toward the end? James's hands pause in their examination. What do you mean? I visited her the day before the end. Mrs. Blackwood continues. She was raving, James, seeing things that weren't there, accusing her maid of plotting against her. It was the fever, of course. Clara's mind was clear until the end. James contradicts her, resuming his examination. The physician confirmed it. Physicians can be wrong, Mrs. Blackwood argues. I've seen consumption take others. Delirium is common in the final stages. James moves to face her, his expression dark. Are you suggesting my sister imagined being poisoned? That the evidence the physician found was somehow a mistake? Mrs. Blackwood meets his gaze steadily. I'm suggesting grief has led you down a path of paranoia, James. There was no murder, only a tragic illness that took a young woman before her time. For a moment, doubt flickers across James's face. Then his jaw sets firmly. The examination, Eleanor. Let me finish. As his hands move to the front of her waistband, Mrs. Blackwood tenses. James, please, this is humiliating. It's necessary, he insists, his fingers working methodically along the fabric. When he completes his examination without finding anything, Mrs. Blackwood exhales shakily. Are you satisfied now? James steps back, confusion evident in his expression. For now, you may go. When Mrs. Blackwood returns to the drawing room, the atmosphere has grown even more tense. Miss Marsh stands by the window, staring out at the storm, while Miss Winters remains by the fire, seemingly lost in thought. James follows a moment later, the revolver once again in his hand. Nothing, he announces, frustration clear in his voice. I found nothing in any of your dresses. Then perhaps you were mistaken, Miss Winters suggests smoothly. Perhaps Clara's journal entry referred to something else entirely, or perhaps it was, as Eleanor suggested, the product of a fevered mind. James shakes his head adamantly. No, Clara was explicit. She wrote that she had hidden evidence in the waistband of her new dress, evidence that would expose her poisoner. May we see this journal entry? Miss Marsh asks, turning from the window. Perhaps we might interpret it differently. James hesitates, then reaches into his jacket pocket and withdraws a small leather-bound book. I've marked the page, he says, handing it to Miss Marsh. As she takes it, her gloved fingers brush against his. Something about the contact makes James pause, a flicker of realization crossing his face. Miss Marsh opens the journal to the marked page and reads aloud. I know now who has been poisoning me. I have proof, a letter in their own hand, admitting everything. They do not know I intercepted it. I will hide it in the waistband of my new dress, the burgundy one with black beadwork. James will know what to do when he finds it. She closes the book and returns it to James. It seems clear enough, she admits. Yet you found nothing in our dresses. Because one of you removed it, James insists, his gaze moving between the three women. One of you found Clara's evidence and destroyed it. A tense silence falls over the room, broken only by the sound of the storm outside and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. There is another possibility, Miss Winters suggests, her voice cutting through the silence. Perhaps the evidence was never hidden in the first place. Perhaps Clara died before she could conceal it. James turns to her, his expression thoughtful. That is possible, which means the letter she mentioned might still be somewhere in this house. Or the murderer already found and destroyed it, Mrs. Blackwood points out. No, James says, a new determination in his voice. If that were the case, why would one of you have recreated Clara's dress? Why make such an exact copy down to the last detail? Miss Marsh interjects. Perhaps because we admired her design, as we've all said. Or perhaps, James continues as if she hadn't spoken, because you needed to ensure that if I ever found her journal and went looking for evidence in her dress, I would find nothing. Because you replaced her original dress with a copy that contained no incriminating letter. The theory hangs in the air, plausible enough to cause all three women to shift uncomfortably. But that doesn't explain why there are three identical dresses, Miss Winters points out, doesn't it? James asks, his eyes narrowing. What better way to confuse the issue than to ensure multiple copies existed, to make it impossible to determine which was the original and which were the copies? Miss Marsh shakes her head. This is becoming absurd, James. You're seeing conspiracies where none exist. Am I? He challenges. Then explain this. Clara's maid told me that in the days before her death, Clara was working on a burgundy dress. Yet after she died, no such dress was found among her belongings. It had vanished. The three women exchanged glances, each seemingly as surprised as the others by this revelation. So you see, James continues, someone took Clara's original dress, someone who knew what was hidden inside it, someone who then commissioned copies to obscure their crime. The accusation lands heavily in the room. Outside, lightning flashes again, closer this time, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flicker but remain on. "I think," Miss Winters says after a moment, "that we need to approach this methodically. If what you say is true, James, then one of our dresses must be different from the others in some way. The copies would be similar but not identical to Clara's original design." "What are you suggesting?" Mrs. Blackwood asks warily. "A more thorough examination," Miss Winters replies. "Not just of the waistbands, but of the entire construction of each dress. Seams, stitching, the pattern of the beadwork. If one dress is the original and two are copies, there will be differences, however subtle." James considers this, then nods slowly. "A sensible approach. But who would conduct such an examination? I'm hardly an expert in dressmaking." "I am," Miss Marsh offers quietly. "As was Clara. We studied together. That hardly makes you an impartial judge," Mrs. Blackwood points out. "Then we shall all examine each dress in turn," Miss Winters decides, "each looking for any discrepancy, any detail that differs from the others." James agrees, though his expression remains skeptical. "Very well, but I warn you all, if this is a delaying tactic, it won't work. I won't rest until I know who killed my sister." And so begins a meticulous examination of each dress, with the women taking turns to stand and be inspected by the others. James watches closely, his revolver never far from his hand. Mrs. Blackwood's dress is examined first. The beadwork is counted, the seams inspected, the hem measured. Nothing unusual is found. Miss Marsh's dress comes next. Again, everything appears consistent with the others, though James notes that she seems increasingly nervous as the examination progresses. Finally, it's Miss Winters' turn. As the tallest of the three women, her dress has been let out slightly to accommodate her height, but otherwise it appears identical to the others. Yet as Mrs. Blackwood examines the waistband more closely, she frowns. "The stitching here is different," she notes, pointing to a section near the back. "It's finer, more precise." James moves closer to look. "What does that mean?" "It could simply be that different seamstresses worked on different parts of the dress," Miss Winters suggests, her voice steady despite being the focus of everyone's attention. "Or that the dress was altered after it was made. Or," Miss Marsh says slowly, "it could mean this section was opened and then resewn." A heavy silence falls as the implication sinks in. "Perhaps," James says, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "we should check inside the waistband. Not just feel through the fabric, but actually open the seam." Miss Winters stiffens almost imperceptibly. "You would damage the dress? A small price to pay for justice," James replies coldly. Before anyone can respond, the lights go out again, plunging the room into near darkness. The fire has burned low, offering only minimal illumination. Someone gasps, Mrs. Blackwood, presumably, and there's a sudden flurry of movement. "Nobody move!" James commands, his voice cutting through the darkness. "I still have the revolver and I won't hesitate to use it." A match flares as James lights one of the oil lamps. As the room gradually re-illuminates, he looks around quickly, counting the women. 1, 2, but where is the third? Miss Winters is gone. "Find her!" James barks, thrusting the lamp into Mrs. Blackwood's hands. "She can't have gone far." The hunt begins. The vast manor house provides countless hiding places, unused bedrooms, servants' quarters, storage rooms, attics. James leads the search, revolver in hand, with Mrs. Blackwood and Miss Marsh following reluctantly behind. They move through darkened corridors, the storm still raging outside, checking room after room. The tension builds with each empty space they discover. "Why would she run if she's innocent?" James mutters as they ascend the grand staircase to the upper floors. "Perhaps because you were threatening her with a gun," Miss Marsh suggests dryly. James ignores the comment, his focus solely on finding the missing woman. As they reach the landing, a floorboard creaks somewhere down the hallway. James freezes, listening intently. Another creak, then the sound of a door closing softly. "This way," he whispers, moving stealthily toward the source of the noise. The hallway leads to what was once Clara's bedroom, untouched since her death. The door is closed but not latched. James pushes it open slowly, the hinges protesting with a low whine. The room beyond is dark, the heavy curtains drawn against the storm outside. James raises the lamp, its light creating more shadows than illumination. "Victoria," he calls out, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "I know you're in here." No response comes, but the atmosphere feels charged, as if the very air is holding its breath. James steps further into the room, gesturing for Mrs. Blackwood and Miss Marsh to remain by the door. He moves toward the large four-poster bed, checking behind the heavy velvet hangings. Nothing. The wardrobe next. He throws open the doors, expecting to find Miss Winters hiding inside. Empty. A movement from the corner of his eye catches his attention, a shadow shifting by the window. James spins, raising the revolver. "Show yourself," he demands. Slowly, a figure emerges from behind the curtains. But it's not Miss Winters. It's Clara. Or rather, someone who looks eerily like Clara, dressed in a white nightgown, her long dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale in the lamplight. James staggers back, the revolver slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "Clara," he whispers, disbelief etched on his face. Mrs. Blackwood screams from the doorway, while Miss Marsh stands frozen, her eyes wide with shock. The figure steps forward, and as it moves into the full light of the lamp, the illusion breaks. It's Miss Winters, her red hair now hidden under a dark wig, her height disguised by her posture, her face powdered white to mimic Clara's pallor. "What madness is this?" James demands, recovering enough to retrieve his weapon. Miss Winters smiles, a cold, calculating expression that transforms her face into something almost predatory. "Not madness, James. A test. I wanted to see how you would react to seeing your sister again. This is beyond cruel," Mrs. Blackwood says from the doorway, her voice shaking. "To impersonate the dead, it's monstrous." "Is it?" Miss Winters asks, pulling off the wig to reveal her copper hair beneath. "No more monstrous than accusing innocent women of murder based on the ravings of a consumptive." James raises the revolver, pointing it directly at her. "You're not innocent. Your reaction proves it. Only the guilty would resort to such tactics." Miss Winters laughs, the sound chilling in the tense atmosphere. "Or perhaps I simply grew tired of your amateur detective game and decided to end it in a suitably dramatic fashion. How did you even know what Clara looked like in her final days?" Miss Marsh asks, stepping into the room. "You claimed you only visited her occasionally." "I have my resources," Miss Winters replies vaguely. James's hand tightens on the revolver. "Enough games. Tell me the truth. Did you kill my sister?" Miss Winters meets his gaze unflinchingly. "No, James. I did not kill Clara, but I know who did." A collective intake of breath from the others fills the silence that follows her declaration. "Who?" James demands, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Winters looks past him, her eyes fixing on someone behind him. "Ask Catherine." All eyes turn to Miss Marsh, who has gone deathly pale. "That's absurd," she says, but her voice lacks conviction. "Clara was my friend." "Was she?" Miss Winters challenges. "Or was she your rival? The woman who stole the man you loved, who overshadowed you at every turn, who possessed the beauty and charm you so desperately coveted?" Miss Marsh shakes her head, backing away. No, you're twisting things." "Am I?" Miss Winters presses. "Then perhaps you can explain why you were seen purchasing arsenic from an apothecary in London 3 weeks before Clara first fell ill, or why you visited her so often during her illness, always insisting on preparing her tea yourself." "That's not true," Miss Marsh insists, though her voice wavers. "I was helping her, caring for her." "You were poisoning her," Miss Winters states flatly, slowly, carefully, making it look like consumption. A few drops in her tea each day, building up in her system until her body could no longer fight it. James turns to Miss Marsh, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Catherine, is this true?" Miss Marsh's composure finally cracks. "She didn't deserve him," she cries, tears streaming down her face. "Edmund was meant to be mine. We had an understanding before she came along with her perfect face and her family connections. She took him from me, James. She took everything from me." The confession hangs in the air, shocking in its raw emotion. Mrs. Blackwood presses a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "So you killed her," James says, his voice hollow. "My sister, who trusted you, who called you friend." Miss Marsh's face twists with a bitter smile. She suspected toward the end, became paranoid, started having her maid taste everything before she would touch it. So I had to be more creative. The arsenic worked just as well when absorbed through the skin. Her hand lotion, her face powder. She never suspected. The letter, James realizes suddenly. The evidence she mentioned in her journal. What was it? "A letter I wrote to the apothecary, thanking him for his discretion in our special transaction," Miss Marsh admits. "Clara must have intercepted it somehow. I searched her room after she died but couldn't find it. I thought perhaps she'd imagined it in her delirium. Until you found her journal, Miss Winters surmises, and realized she'd hidden the letter in her dress. Miss Marsh nods slowly. I took the dress she was working on, finished it myself, then had 2 copies made, just in case. I thought if the original was ever found, it would be impossible to prove which dress was hers. James raises the revolver again, his hand shaking with fury. You murdered my sister for a man who likely would never have married you anyway. James, Mrs. Blackwood says warningly, stepping forward. Don't do something you'll regret. Regret? He laughs bitterly. The only thing I regret is ever allowing this viper into our lives. Miss Marsh's expression hardens, the tears drying on her cheeks. Go ahead, James. Shoot me. Add murder to the tragedy. It won't bring Clara back. A tense moment passes, the revolver wavering in James's grip. Then slowly, he lowers it. No, he says quietly. Clara wouldn't want that. Justice will be served properly. The authorities will deal with you. Miss Marsh's shoulders slump in apparent defeat. Then, with a movement so swift it catches everyone by surprise, she reaches into her bodice and withdraws a small vial. No! Miss Winters lunges forward, but she's too late. Miss Marsh uncorks the vial and brings it to her lips, swallowing its contents before anyone can stop her. I won't hang for her, she says, her voice already growing weak. I won't give any of you that satisfaction. She collapses to the floor, her body convulsing as the poison, presumably the same arsenic she used on Clara, takes effect. James kneels beside her, horror etched on his face. Why? He asks, though it's unclear if he's addressing Miss Marsh or some higher power. Why any of this? Miss Marsh's eyes fix on his, a strange calm settling over her features as the convulsions subside. Because I loved her too much to let her go, she whispers, and not enough to let her live without me. Her final breath leaves her body, and Catherine Marsh is gone, taking her secrets and her motivations to the grave. A heavy silence falls over the room, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder as the storm begins to move away. How did you know? Mrs. Blackwood finally asks, turning to Miss Winters. About Catherine? About the arsenic? Miss Winters straightens her posture, some indefinable change coming over her demeanor. Because I was hired to find out, she says simply. Hired? James repeats, rising slowly from beside Miss Marsh's body. By whom? By Clara, Miss Winters reveals. Or more specifically, by Clara's fiancé, Edmund Haversham. Clara suspected someone was poisoning her and confided in Edmund. He engaged my services. Your services? Mrs. Blackwood echoes, confusion evident in her voice. Miss Winters inclines her head slightly. I am not, in fact, the daughter of Colonel Winters of the Bengal Lancers. My name is Victoria Blackwell, and I am a private inquiry agent. My specialty is cases involving women, particularly those where conventional investigators might be inappropriate. James stares at her in disbelief. A female detective? I've never heard of such a thing. That's rather the point, Miss Winters, or rather Miss Blackwell replies with a hint of a smile. My effectiveness relies partly on my anonymity. Women speak freely to other women, share confidences they would never reveal to a man. So your entire persona, your friendship with Clara, it was all a lie? Mrs. Blackwood asks, a note of accusation in her voice. My friendship with Clara was genuine, Miss Blackwell assures her. I came to care for her deeply during our acquaintance. Her death affected me more than it should have for someone in my profession. James runs a hand through his hair, struggling to process this new information. Why didn't you tell me? After she died, why continue the charade? Because I hadn't identified her poisoner with certainty, Miss Blackwell explains. I had suspicions but no proof. I needed to draw the killer out to force a confession. The dresses, James realizes. That was your idea. Miss Blackwell nods. When I learned from Clara's journal that she had hidden evidence in her dress, I knew the killer would be desperate to find it. By recreating the scenario, 3 women in identical dresses, one of whom might possess the incriminating letter, I hoped to provoke a reaction. A dangerous game, Mrs. Blackwood observes. But an effective one, Miss Blackwell counters, glancing at Miss Marsh's lifeless form. Though I didn't anticipate this particular outcome. James looks down at the body of the woman he once considered a friend. What happens now? Now, Miss Blackwell says, straightening her shoulders. We notify the authorities. A woman has died by her own hand after confessing to murder. There will be questions, investigations, and scandal, Mrs. Blackwood adds quietly. Clara's name will be dragged through the mud, The poisoning, the deception, it will be in every newspaper from here to London. Perhaps not, Miss Blackwell suggests thoughtfully, if we handle it carefully. Catherine Marsh took her own life out of remorse for a terrible mistake. A medicinal tonic she prepared for her dear friend that accidentally contained a toxic substance. A tragic accident, nothing more. You would have us lie? James asks, though without much conviction. I would have us protect Clara's memory, Miss Blackwell corrects him, and spare her fiancé the pain of a public scandal. Edmund has suffered enough, don't you think? After a moment's consideration, James nods slowly. For Clara's sake, then. But what about the letter? The evidence she hid? Miss Blackwell reaches into the waistband of her dress, the area where the stitching had appeared different, and carefully extracts a folded piece of paper. Here, she says, offering it to James. Clara did hide it in her dress, just as she wrote in her journal. When I found her original gown among Catherine's belongings, I discovered this sewn into the waistband. James takes the letter with trembling hands but doesn't open it. You've had this all along? Why not simply present it as evidence? A letter alone proves nothing, Miss Blackwell explains. It could be forged, misinterpreted. I needed a confession, and for that, I needed Catherine to believe her secret was still safe until the last possible moment. Mrs. Blackwood shakes her head in wonder. It's almost admirable in a terrible way. The planning, the patience. There is nothing admirable about murder, Miss Blackwell says firmly. Only tragedy and waste. Outside, the storm has passed, leaving behind a gentle rainfall that patters against the windows. The worst has ended, though the aftermath remains to be dealt with. As James moves to cover Miss Marsh's body with a blanket, a thought occurs to him. The dress you're wearing, it's Clara's original, isn't it? Not a copy. Miss Blackwell nods. Yes, I thought it fitting somehow that her final creation should serve in bringing her killer to justice. And the waist? James asks. What was different about it? Eleanor noticed something. Clara had smaller measurements than I, Miss Blackwell explains. The dress had to be let out slightly to fit me, particularly at the waist. The stitching there is indeed different. My handiwork, not Clara's. A bittersweet smile touches James's lips. She would have appreciated the irony. Clara always did have a flair for the dramatic. Indeed she did, Miss Blackwell agrees, a similar smile playing at her lips. A quality I came to admire greatly in her. As the first light of dawn begins to filter through the curtains, the three survivors of the night's event stand in contemplative silence. The truth has been revealed, justice of a sort has been served, and Clara's memory can now rest undisturbed. The mystery of the three women in identical dresses has been solved. The tallest one's waist had indeed concealed a secret, though not the one James had initially suspected. And in the process, a greater truth had come to light. That friendship, love, and betrayal often wear identical faces, indistinguishable until one looks closely enough to see what lies beneath. In the days that follow, Catherine Marsh is buried quietly, her death attributed to heart failure, a convenient fiction that spares both families public scandal. Edmund Haversham, when informed of the truth, chooses to honor Clara's memory by establishing a charitable foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting young women of artistic talent. Mrs. Blackwood returns to London, her relationship with James forever altered by the night's revelations. They remain cordial, connected by their shared grief for Clara, but the easy friendship they once enjoyed has been replaced by something more cautious, more reserved. As for Miss Victoria Blackwell, she disappears as mysteriously as she arrived, moving on to her next case, her next identity. But before she leaves Thornfield Manor for the last time, she places a single red rose on Clara's grave, a final tribute from one remarkable woman to another. The burgundy dress with black beadwork is packed away, never to be worn again. Its secret revealed, its purpose fulfilled, it becomes simply what Clara had originally intended it to be, a beautiful garment, designed with love and skill by a woman whose life was cut tragically short. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light falls just so across the drawing room of Thornfield Manor, the servants swear they can see the shadow of a woman in a burgundy dress, moving gracefully across the floor, finally at peace. The year is 1895, and in a world where women are expected to be decorative and compliant, three women in identical dresses challenge those expectations in very different ways. One through creation, one through destruction, and one through investigation. Their stories, so briefly intertwined on that stormy night, would echo through time, remembered whenever someone thought to look more closely at what lies beneath the surface of things or people. For as James Thornfield learned to his sorrow, it is not the dress that reveals the truth about the wearer, but the secrets hidden at the waist, the center, the core, the heart of the matter. And in the end, those secrets will always find their way into the light. Thornfield Manor still stands today, its stone walls weathered by time but still imposing against the Yorkshire sky. The drawing room remains much as it was that fateful night, though the furniture has been rearranged, the portraits rehung. The grandfather clock still ticks away the seconds, indifferent to the dramas that unfold around it. And if visitors sometimes feel a chill when passing through the doorway, if they sometimes glimpse movement from the corner of their eye, or hear the rustle of silk when no one is there, well, that's to be expected in a house with such a history. After all, some stories never truly end. They simply wait in the shadows, in the space between heartbeats, in the hidden compartments of our lives where we conceal our deepest truths. They wait for someone curious enough, brave enough, to look beyond the surface and discover what lies beneath. So if you ever find yourself in possession of a burgundy silk dress with black beadwork across the bodice, take a moment to check the waistband. You never know what secrets might be sewn into the fabric, what stories might be waiting to be told. And if you happen to be the tallest woman in the room wearing such a dress, well, perhaps some secrets are best left undisturbed, for now. The end. Or perhaps merely the beginning of another mystery, another story, another revelation waiting to be discovered. For in the world of shadows and secrets, nothing is ever truly as it seems, and no ending is ever quite final. Just ask the three women in identical dresses, if you dare. In the years following the events at Thornfield Manor, rumors persisted about Miss Victoria Blackwell. Some claimed to have encountered her in London, solving cases too delicate for Scotland Yard. Others insisted they had seen her in Paris or Vienna, or even as far afield as Cairo, always elegant, always observant, and always, somehow, at the center of some unfolding mystery. James Thornfield never remarried. He devoted himself to his shipping business and to preserving Clara's memory through charitable works. The drawing room at Thornfield Manor was eventually redecorated, the furniture replaced, the wallpaper changed, all except for the porcelain shepherdess on the mantelpiece, which remained as a small, silent tribute to his sister. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood found herself in an unexpectedly improved financial position after Catherine Marsh's death. It emerged that Catherine, in a fit of remorse or perhaps calculation, had named Eleanor's son as her heir. The Blackwood family's fortunes were restored, though Eleanor would sometimes wake in the night, troubled by dreams of three women in burgundy dresses, circling each other like wary predators. And Edmund Haversham, he carried the weight of Clara's death like a stone upon his heart. Though he eventually married, a practical alliance with a duke's daughter, those who knew him well said he never smiled with his eyes again. As for the burgundy dress with its black beadwork, it was said to have been destroyed in a fire that consumed a wing of Thornfield Manor in 1901. But some insist that's not true at all, that the dress was preserved, passed down through generations, its secret compartment now empty but still waiting, perhaps, for new evidence, new secrets, new stories to contain. The truth, as is so often the case, remains hidden beneath layers of history and hearsay, of fact and fiction interwoven so tightly that separating one from the other becomes impossible. Perhaps that's as it should be. Some mysteries are meant to endure, to be pondered rather than solved. So when you next attend a gathering and notice three women wearing the same dress, take a closer look. Pay particular attention to the tallest one's waist. You never know what secrets might be concealed there, what evidence might be hidden in plain sight. For in a world of appearances and deceptions, the truth often hides in the most obvious places, waiting for someone brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to seek it out. The shadow knows, the dress remembers, and the waistband keeps its secrets. For now, Shadow Frames presents Three Women in 1895, Wear Same Dress Until You Check the Tallest One's Waist. A tale of deception, detection, and deadly fashion from a time when appearances were everything, and the most dangerous secrets were often hidden in plain sight. Remember, some threads once pulled unravel more than just a dress. Watch at your own risk.